Hey everybody, welcome back to DejaVue. It's your favorite Vue podcast. You just don't know it yet. And as you might hear it, we are not alone here. Actually, it's the two of us. Michael is on vacation. And of course, I don't want to do a podcast alone. Probably could, but it would be more or less a YouTube video. Anyway, long story short, I have an amazing guest here with me. If you watch the video, you might be like a bit confused, like why is not a cat sitting in front of the microphone? Because it's the one and only Matias Capeletto, also known as Patak. How are you doing?
Hey, Alex. Doing great here. Thanks a lot. Very nice to talk to you.
Yeah,
again.
Likewise. As usual. It's always great to have a chat. And now we talk about on the podcast all about Vite, what's going on there, latest news. But before, maybe a little bit about you personally, because like usually when we have guests on the podcast, we want to capture a little bit of the history, how they got into programming and so on, so on. So right now you're doing open source at StackBlitz. So you work on open source full time. But how did you get there? Like, how did you get started with maybe programming first of all?
That's long ago.
That's fine. That's fine.
I study electronic engineer and always liked it more the programming side. I did my first open source with C++. Like I got like a good summer of code and did a library for Boost. I did that for a while, but then like I ended up working on like a graphical engine for the web for a long time, not doing anything related to open source. But that introduced me to the web, like in the time of Internet Explorer 6. And like
Wow.
it was, yes, SVG was not even available like everywhere, like just to give a... And yeah, like I got at one point working in a company where I was like focusing on education, and like there was a lot of an agency with a lot of people joining per week. And we started using open source as a tool to like help developers like learn skills, also like soft skills. Like you learn like when you send a PR, you talk with the maintainer. Not to be like sending a lot of PRs everywhere, but like it is a really good tool if you do it right. And we had this small like open source club where like every week we will like share the PRs that we were doing. And I started again doing open source in around the Vue ecosystem, like Vue use. Because of that, like I wanted to like be part and not only say like, hey, you should do PR because this is good for you, but like also like be part of that group. Quickly, it's starting to like get back to me, like the doing open source. And Vue use took me to VitePress, and VitePress at one point I ended up like sending a few PRs to Vite in the times when Evan was doing this crazy sprint to go from Vite 1 to Vite 2. Mm-hmm. And that this was like incredible to see Evan work there. And like I started like doing documentation, PRs, and like working on Rollup compatibility. There was at that point, it wasn't like very polished. So I was reporting issues and like everyone was closing them before I hit the like open issue button. So,
wow.
So it was very nice. And yeah, like at one point I decided that we'd look at like a very interesting project to learn and to also be involved with like maintainers that for me was like my heroes for a long time. A lot of the people from like framework authors were starting to get into Discord. We created like the Discord with other people from the community, and it was like a really interesting time. And Evan had to refocus on Vue because like he spent a lot of time in Vite at that point.
And Vue 2, Vue 3 was still outstanding, right? At that point, I think?
I think that was already released at that point, but there was still like a lot to do because like the transition between Vue 2 and Vue 3 like it
still ongoing
in certain ways.
Then maybe it was around time of like script setup and so on, coming like 3.2 or something like that. Yeah, because I remember that was like, okay, let's shift the focus back. Yes.
Yeah, and so like he created like the Vite team, so like to focus on daily maintenance of it. And Anthony Fu, Underfin, that now is working in Rolldown, and like me, like we're the initial group. We quickly starting to like involve other people, like some people that were helping from the Svelte side, for example, that already migrated from Snowpack to Vite. And so, yeah, like that started the story with Vite that later on, as you said, luckily, Eric Simmons, the CEO of StackBlitz, like contacted me, and Vite was extremely aligned with what they needed because they had this online IDE that could load Node. like could run Node in the browser, and it was like loading very fast. But then when the build tool step and npm install of like the tool came up, it was like very slow. And Vite, it was exactly the piece they needed to, so like the whole experience will be very fast. It was very lean and like very fast, so like in development mode.
When would you say that like Eric from Stackless contacted you to say, hey, do you wanna work as an open source maintainer and getting paid by Stackless, like work on Stackless but spend your time on Vite? Like, how long did it take you from, let's say, your first contribution to Vite, and how did you do that? Like in your free time, I guess, after hours?
I was at the beginning doing it after hours and a little bit like in the hours, because like this was part of like this open source like work, like education, like working with other people there in that company. But I was already working part-time there, so I had some time. I was able to arrange things, so like slowly I was more and more spending time on the open source side and like less on that company. I have already decided that I will just like jump into open source, because I saw like the growth and I saw how things were going. And I knew that if I do this for a year, like even like just like without any pay at all. So like, I already decided like I will just do this for a year. And I arranged it with like the company I was working. I like told them like I will just do this because this is like an incredible opportunity for me. And yeah, I jumped it, and I knew that I had doors open. Like it's like I don't want to say that I jumping into the void there. And luckily this, I think that when I did that, I already got contacted by Eric maybe like 2 months after that or something like that. And then just to give this was like a year, less than a year after the creation of the Vite team. And we were just like creating Vite test. So at that particular point, it was the time when Vitesse was like in this sponsorware mode, like kind of a steal mode before like opening. And Anthony Fu was like, coding like crazy. And like everybody in that like little community that we formed was like, it was a very, very interesting time. And like I joined in that. I think like the first contact with Eric was in December, and I ended up like February, I was starting to work there. And it has been amazing, because I think that this setup where the companies hire open source developers to work full time is like really interesting, both for the developers and for the projects, because you can do long time planning. It is very different just being able to code on your nights, like compared to like you have the time to properly do it. So it was great. And then after that, like there was like other companies getting other people involved, because Vite just grow. And now like we have VoidZero also, that like it's just like taking things to a completely different level.
Exactly. But before we jump into that whole angle, I mean, there's so many points we could talk about. It's so crazy, because it's really a remarkable project. But for everybody maybe listening and heard like, oh yeah, Vite, I heard about it. I kind of also like use it, but I don't actually know what it is doing. Like, before there was something like webpack, right, in the past, and we don't use it anymore. And there are also other things. Like, maybe if you would explain like the average developer out there what Vite is, what would you say? Or what do you say if people ask you, what is it?
First, like something that is important there is that like if people are using Vite and they don't realize, that is one of the best compliments they can give to a build tool. Like it isn't getting in your way, it's doing the job. Normally when you realize it's that it's not the best. But so like I think like everybody is familiar with Webpack, but if not, like when you build a Vue application, you code like with like single file components in like your .vue. And if you feed that .vue to a browser, like it will not know how to like cope with it, more or less, because like in Vue in particular, you can like import directly from a CDN like and get it done. But you need to normally imagine that you have like Tailwinds, or you have like any like JSX in React, like you need a tool that will get your source code. You are using TypeScript, for example. Like you need a tool that will take all this source code and will compile it into only HTML, CSS, and JS that the browser know how to execute. That is like baseline, but these build tools also do a lot more for you. And they will, for example, tree shake your code. So like if you have a lot of like functionality that you're not using at all. You can create like smaller bundles and only send to the browser what is actually going to be needed. And then your application can run faster. And then you have like browsers, like depending on what is your target users, these build tools will also like downgrade your code to like the lower common denominator that you need, so it will run across all the browsers and it will transpile certain syntax. It will do things from, for example, stripping the types, like removing all the type information that you like. It's helpful while you develop, but later on it shouldn't be there when you execute it.
Absolutely.
So this is like the build tool during like build time. But all these build tools, this process is costly. Tree shaking and compiling and creating this bundle takes time. So what happened is that you also have like a dev mode in these tools where you have different trade-off because you have your source code directly there. In the case of Webpack, for example, how it was before, it will still generate the bundle at the beginning, but it generates the bundle in a certain way that later on there is a lot of annotations for doing what is called module replacement. So like when you change a particular module, only that module is sent and then it's like replace it into the whole thing. And then you can have this experience where you are editing a file, like changing some letters, like a paragraph, and you see it right away on the other side. Vite, in particular, what really set it apart was that browsers at that point were like a lot more advanced than when Webpack started. So like we could use directly ESM, like modules in development mode. So like if you see how dev mode work in Vite, like we don't bundle anything. We just start a smart dev server that like when the browser requests the first index HTML, like we transform that one and give it back with the right path. So to keep like asking for the scripts, for the CSS, and the browser will ask for like, give me this TS file. And Vite on the other side, like will grab that only one module and will strip the types of that particular module and give that something that the browser can consume. And all the tree is like recreated on the browser side, but at the module level, let's say. And this was really interesting because instead of having like when you start Webpack, you will have to wait for the bundle to be generated before giving it to the browser.
I can remember like back in the times that always took a while. Yeah.
Yes. And Webpack is a like JS tool. So like it's not like what we have right now with some like Rust, like ESBuild that is writing in Go, or like Rolldown in Rust that is like that process is extremely fast. So it enables some other things. But in the like with Vite, you will like we will print how much time it took to start the thing, and that was kind of like it was started like in less than 100 milliseconds because basically we don't do anything. So it was just like
just a process basically.
Like loading the config file and printing. It took us nothing, and it was very magical at first because if your application doesn't have like let's say 10,000 modules that at the end up adding up, then it's really like for most applications, except like some like monster enterprise application, it was just like magical. It felt like opening just a static server and just seeing the files there, and
like the good old experience of just like, okay, here's a server and we can just go using the things.
Yeah. And then HMR also was a lot simpler, the model, because we could also replace at the like module level. It was extremely fast. It scaled very well, no matter like how many modules you had. So it really allowed for like this close feedback loop that was like incredible. Like grabbing, like the color wheel in CSS, like in a CSS color in the source code, not in the browser.
Yeah.
And in the source code, changing it and seeing it like in real time on the other side. It really changes that you can create by exploration, even like changing something and seeing like, oh, I like it here, and then if there is compile time in the middle, like you cannot do that. Like if it's choppy and like you cannot explore to set like what you want. It was like really special. And Vite was not alone in that particular time when Evan, we talked about Vite 2, Snowpack, Web Dev Server, WMR from the folks of Preact. They were all working on similar setups. And I think that depending on just how the JS ecosystem will arrange, we could be talking about the Snowpack at this point. Because basically what needed to happen is that the ecosystem will say, okay, let's choose one, let's work together. Because that is, I think, another of the special things that happened with Vite. It was not only the speed in development or maybe the zero configuration feeling that, again, we were lucky because in the time of Webpack needed to explore a lot, and give a lot of flexibility because people were not using TypeScript. It was Flow and TypeScript and maybe
Coffee
something else.
scripts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when Vite was started, the ecosystem already decided on a lot of common patterns. So Vite could say, okay, TypeScript worked by default, and we didn't even need to care about Flow. Nobody was using it at that time, and so that helped us a lot with giving proper defaults. And then what helped us a ton was Rollup, that had this beautiful plugin system. And the WMR actually pioneered this idea of having plugins that worked both in build and in dev, the same exact code. And this is one of the main changes between Vite 1 and Vite 2, that Evan adopted the same strategy. And that really uttered a lot of innovation between frameworks that were able to use this plugin system that's very, very approachable, very easy compared to the way that Webpack worked, for example, is very approachable. That created not only frameworks starting to migrate to Vite easily because they could write their plugins, but framework could start to collaborate between themselves to create shared plugins. And then there's a lot of extra pieces now that Vite is only one piece of the whole puzzle. You have things like the whole Ansible umbrella, for example, that was extracted from Nuxt, and all these little pieces that you need to build frameworks are you can use directly there. And also Nitro, for example, that it's like Vite but for the server, so you can write the server and you have it deployed anywhere
Easily. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So now it feels like I said the other day that Vite doesn't have an ecosystem, but it's part of it, because it is all this project together decided that, okay, we will share at a higher level, and Vite was that piece. But Vite exists because of the ecosystem, and it is not the other way around to me.
That makes sense. Also, I mean, on the other hand, if people say oh yeah, every framework has a Vite plugin, so in a way, yeah, Vite wouldn't be there if frameworks wouldn't bet on it. Mm-hmm. But that shared piece of, let's say, infrastructure, or let's say this shared piece of the build tool everybody uses right now except Next.js, this is also there for a reason. So I want to dive into two topics there that you mentioned a lot once again, which is pretty amazing. And if anyone, of course, has any questions, just put them in the comments, for example, on YouTube, or just write us on our socials. We're happy to answer them, or just tag DejaVue on the socials and we get into that. So you mentioned the speed of Vite compared to something like Webpack before. Of course, mainly because of that unbundled mode, to say, okay, we don't have to build the bundle beforehand. That would take a lot of time for startup. Now it's okay, we start up a server and just serve the things and transform them basically on the fly. But is there anything else that contributed to the speed factor of Vite there compared to Webpack?
Yeah, so this on the fly worked because we had native tools that were actually extremely fast, that allows us to, for example, to do type stripping or to convert JSX on the fly, really, really fast. And that was ESBuild. That was this build tool, writing in Go. So Vite used that to do this kind of type stripping, for example. And we also use it for example, to optimize dependencies, because one of the problems, when I set these like if you have 10,000 files, then like this model is not break because like it's still more or less the same time as before, but it's not like as magical, let's say.
Yeah.
There is a lot of things that you can do because like you can break your project in a monorepo and then like only load certain pieces, and like there is a lot to do. But that amount of files, you can reach it very quickly if you do things like importing Lodash that has one module for each of the functions. And then because of how the dev mode works, like you cannot tree shake during development. This was like one of the trade-offs. Normally that's not a problem. But if you have a lot of these kind of dependencies, then you will end up like with loading a lot of modules. So what we like Evan at one point end up doing is that introduces this step during development that on call start, it will grab all your dependencies. There is a very quick scan phase using ESBuild that is not like compiling anything. It's just like looking for the imports. And then like it finds out all your dependencies, and the ones that are missing can be found like later on in the process. And it will bundle all your dependencies together. And then you have like, instead of having like Lodash with like hundreds or as many modules, you have like a single tidy module that you're going to import. And if they are like 10 dependencies and maybe some shared pieces, you're going to have like some common pieces because it's kind of like you're bundling everything together. And then that is called start, and this is cache. And then on warm start, the next time you run it, then it's going to be like this optimized step is already there, and you just like start with your source code and you just import these, optimize it by ESBuild bundles for your dependencies. And then automatically when there is a new dependency, you can like the application reloads if needed, because if the dependency doesn't have anything in common, it can directly like load the new optimized dependency without you having to reload the page. And that ESBuild was incredible. Like it really allowed it to do this kind of stuff that before it was like impossible.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, especially also with the native power of Go, to just be fast while doing that. Like no JavaScript tool could possibly do that in the same time. So that's interesting. But then you also mentioned Rollup as the bundler that's used by Vite under the hood. And now you also mentioned ESBuild. So what's the relation between the two of them in Vite itself?
So during development, we don't use Rollup. Like what we have is a Rollup pipeline to execute all the plugins on each of the modules, but it's not really Rollup because there is like no bundling. During build time, you can think of Vite as a very opinionated Rollup setup that is like pre-done for you. So there during build, like we are using Rollup, and then ESBuild during build is used to also like stripe the types, for example, for each module before giving them to Rollup to speed up the process. It was always like problematic because even if we do a lot of effort on Vite to try to squash any kind of difference between dev and build, we always had these two very different tools like ESBuild and Rollup. Each of them, as any open source project or any software project, will have their own bugs, their own quirks. So there was always this idea of how we could unify the tooling, internal tooling in Vite, because that could simplify a lot. And it seemed like one of the possibilities, like we had this in the why guide for a long time, because people were asking, why don't you use ESBuild during build? Because that will be a lot faster. And the answer was that ESBuild is not as flexible as Rollup. Like the kind of plugins that you can write, it's like you have a lot less control, and this is completely intentional because ESBuild has like a smaller scope, but this is why it's very fast. It's going to do things in a certain way that like if you let people like put a lot of plugins there, you end up like losing
all the speed.
That the speed there. But at one point that was a real possibility that ESBuild will continue to evolve and maybe start to add more flexibility, like evolve their plugin system in a way that we could use it and give like maybe an opt-in way. If you don't need that much customization, maybe you can opt in into using ESBuild during build. But all that changed it. I don't know if that will have ever happened, to be honest, because it was very clear that the scope was not growing at one point there on ESBuild side.
Evan Wallace, like who's no, it was Evan Wallace, I think, right?
Yeah,
Who's maintaining
it's Evan Wallace.
He's also like, what I remember from issues, like clearly saying to some things like, hey, I don't want to implement that, and then it doesn't go into ESBuild because it's out of scope, because it's So I guess
that is completely respectable, and like it's why some open source projects work well. Like we did a lot of that with Vite at the beginning too, because like there were a lot of people that wanted to migrate from Webpack, and they had like these very esoteric setups, or maybe like people from Electron side, and we were very saying like, okay, like look, Vite is a front end tool, and we're going to keep it like this will be our scope, and this is why we can keep it simple, because like we are not going to open it up with like tons of config options. And we can talk a little bit like how things are changing also there, because like as Vite gets more adopted, like responsibilities for the project also start to change a lot. But I think that this story about ESBuild and Rollup like is a good segue into VoidZero and Rolldown, because this is what happened. That at one point Evan saw the growth of Vite, and something needed to happen, because enterprise was starting to use a lot Vite, and we are starting to have a lot of use cases where the model and the way that we were developing Vite was not scaling as fast as like the user side. And also there were all these like little paper cuts that maybe users will not see them, but we knew that they were there, like these things like ESBuild and Rollup, having like these two completely different systems in our internals. So Evan like created VoidZero, and they're starting to work on Rolldown. And there is another piece here of the puzzle that is OXC. Ocean was also like working on this piece before, and OXC is like native Rust version of Babel, and it's like another incredible project. And with that piece, like they build Rolldown. That actually it's very interesting, because Rolldown, the first try, I think it was even before Vite, they tried.
Really?
Like there was this Rolldown repo.
Interesting.
They tried for a bit, and then that project didn't end up working, or it's not working, but like, it takes a lot of time and efforts to actually take a project like Rollup and say like, okay, let's port it to Rust, because Rollup is also a moving target. Lucas is doing an amazing job there and keep improving things.
And it's also like it's a complex thing in the end, right? That's the other thing. Yeah. It's like used for like so many projects, and with Vite, with so many frameworks, and then all the tiny details you have to pay attention, and then porting all of that over to Rust, make sure it works. Somehow also figure out, okay, what maybe are the limitations? What can we like? Maybe okay, we need feature parity in some point. We want extra features. We want also like something API wise that's I think closer to ESBuild on the other hand.
This was like, if you want to replace Rollup and ESBuild, you need something that will take the scope of both of them.
Yes.
So it should be like as fast as ESBuild, but with the flexibility of Rollup. It is like a tall order. These folks that were working on Rolldown, they want to work. A lot of related people want to work on RSPack, on ViteDance. And then like they move it back to work on Rolldown again once Evan created that team. And like this is like the next evolution of it. Now already Rolldown, it is like the 1.0 beta is already there, and there is Safi Red and Hiroshi are working for VoidZero. Like these are people from the Vite and Vite team, and that they have been working on this version. Like it's in another repo. It's called Rolldown Vite, and it's the same Vite, but instead of having Rollup and ESBuild, is full Rolldown, and this simplifies a lot in internals. And like you could have like the dep optimization can be exactly the same as like the normal way you bundle your dependencies with now Rolldown on both sides, Rolldown during build and Rolldown on dev. And like they have been working with, we have this tool called Ecosystem CI that allow us to test, I think like 25 of the biggest projects using Vite, like all the frameworks, the Vites, like all the storybook against Vite main. And they have a version of that is like against Rolldown Vite, and they are working like one by one, like
to make them
making
all work.
sure, making it work. And there is like details that are, because like some features are not yet implemented, but they are working their way, and also like porting back things to the main Vite, so like things stays together at the same level. And soon we are thinking now that on Vite 7 we're going to be able to give, like with an environment variable, like if you're using Vite Core, another like package is going to be installed that is this Rolldown Vite, and then you're going to run directly this Rolldown Vite version. And this is like done with an environment variable, so like you can set it up globally like for your project, and then like everything, like all your tools, Vitess, like your framework, everything will use like this version like easily. And this will allow us on Vite 7 to quickly get a lot of feedback from the whole ecosystem. To me, it's amazing that like the work that they have done in Rolldown is like, hat off to all the team at VoidZero, because they have done an incredible job pulling out something like this that really is probably going to be released like with all the ecosystem CI green. So like
that's the best.
It's just amazing. Yeah, looking forward to that. Like we are thinking on Vite 7 to be released after Node 18 is end of life. So this is end of April. So around, like if everything goes right, it will be like around May that we can release this version. And then, it will depend on how things evolve, but like maybe Vite 8, we could default to it. So a lot of exciting stuff there. And also for the future, because Rolldown, now that we have something that is so fast, we can actually start to think again of, is the unbundled mode the best thing that we can do now? Because if we have like this tool that is so fast, like maybe we can offer, like, let's say at first, at least offer for this project that has like 10,000 modules, like in enterprise, bundle mode for development that work like more akin to how like Webpack work it. But this will allow us to have even less differences between build and dev. If it is like really fast, then you can you can have like a very good experience. It is interesting because like a lot of why Vite is this unbundled mode. But now at the end, like we may have that mode and it will be like the two options. But we will see long term how that works. I think that maybe in 2 years there will be some decisions to make there, because if this bundle mode works so well, we need to see like what to do with the unbundled one.
Yeah, why support both if like there's one clearly superior mode and it's working well for any size of project, it's fast. That's a fair point. But
but we need to see how it may still be that there are trade-offs. So like we have to see it, but this is already like long term. But
just
it is very interesting that like all these like doors that start to open because of having a tool that is as fast as ESBuild, but as flexible as Rollup.
Absolutely. No, I'm also like looking forward to it a lot. I follow all the things closely. For all the listeners that maybe haven't listened to episode 31, that was where I also talked with Evan Yu at VueFest Japan, all about VoidZero. So like the brief frame of like, why a company, why VC money. So if people are interested in that, definitely check that out. It was a lovely episode there. And that gives also a little bit more context from Evan's side, like, okay, when did that come up, and so on and so on. But yeah, it's crazy how things developed in the last couple of years there, with like Vite becoming the de facto standard, right? And now, in a way, okay, there are basically two build tools, Rollup for build, the ESBuild for dev. Let's merge them into one. Like also being in control in terms of like adding future feature sets. Like one thing that I've seen, and I know a lot of people miss from the good old Webpack days, is like the topic of chunk controls, right? Like, hey, I want to have my chunk with fine-grained control. It's not that easy in Rollup, right? In Rolldown it will be, hopefully.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because also now that there is proper resources to like implement all these features. This go back also to the story about the scope of Vite. Like at the beginning, we could say no to a lot of people and say, for like, we answer a lot of issues saying like, look, use Webpack. Like this is not a use case that we are interested in supporting because we want to maintain in an open source project, like can be really hard if you just keep growing the scope.
Yeah, feature creep as well. Like, okay, we need more and more, more. And then, how do you keep it maintainable? Exactly.
And the Rollup plugin system helped us a ton to say no to a lot of things, because we could say no, but you can do your own plugin. But there were certain things that we couldn't do, and we will just say, like, we had to accept that this is the limit of like what our team can do, and like also like what we can do with the current tools that we have. But roll down, simplifying things internally, and also like the growth that Vite had. At one point, it started to be, we cannot say to people like go to use Webpack, because like the ecosystem now, a lot of the ecosystem migrated to Vite. And if you go to use Webpack, then you cannot use Vitest in the same way. You can not use a lot of like plugins that are available. So like there are efforts like unplugin that allows you to write plugins in a way that also work in Webpack, but not everything will be working in the same way.
True.
So there is a lot of benefits on being part of like a huge ecosystem. This is also like the other interesting arc that happened, is that from one side, Rolldown was targeting also these like huge use cases, like being able to like cope with like huge code bases. But at the same time, we started to need more flexibility to cope with like other cases. One thing, for example, will be like Electron, and like making Electron a first-class citizen, or like React Native, maybe not only focus on like web app, you know, like
go beyond that. Yes.
Yeah, go beyond that. And also like web app are starting to be a lot more complex, like in their server setup. So like you could have like a node server or like next to your database, but then you have like an edge piece like that, like you route things through it. Vite was created in a way where like there were two default environments. Like you have like your client environment, and then you have this SSR environment that you could also use, like that was running in Node. And some people adapted it to also run in like Worker D, or like to run it in Clover, or like, but there was no formal concept of like, I don't have two environments, like I have three, how I do that. And then people are starting to say, okay, then I will just create several Vite dev servers.
That's like, what we have in Nuxt, for example. Yeah, exactly.
So, and this is also what Vinci did, allowed you to create like for each of your environment, like different bits, like plugin pipeline directly. Vinci was like developed also like to make Vite and Nitro like work together in a way that you could create frameworks with it, using like orchestrating several Vite servers. Solid Start was the first consumer of Vinci, and then Tanstack starts, that they are like Tanner and Ryan are always close.
Oh yeah,
working closely together. Tanstack Start also adopted Vinci, and this is starting to show that Vite was being pushed like far away from its scope. It was not the most efficient way to have like several Vite servers. And there was this need, like this idea that you only had these two environments, like client and SSR, and they were like hard coded. It always felt that some more general abstraction was like needed here. Like we had a lot of APIs, for example, where we get this Boolean if it is a SSR or not. And then we needed to pass that Boolean in other APIs. And it worked. Like all the story of being able to do SSR in Vite was part of why framework adopted Vite. So like it was incredible that we had that story. This was interesting because it was adapted from a version done by Svelte in the time of Snowpack.
Oh, okay.
But by Rich Harris, where they had this idea of during dev, had also an unbundled dev server for the server's code. This idea was like also adopted as part of Vite 2. And yeah, like this is at one point, all these was distilled into creating Vite Node for Nuxt also. A lot of like roads get into Nuxt because like there was a lot of pieces that were created during the Nuxt 2 to 3 transition.
Yes.
That like Nitro and that later on like really play a very important role. And Vite Node allowed you to execute using the Vite dev server, but like running the code that was generated by the Vite server in like anywhere. So like you could do it in a thread, or you can do it in a like web worker. This piece was needed for Nuxt3 to connect Vite and Nitro, and then was the key to create Vitest. Like when Anthony had already done Vite Node, and he used that as the engine of Vitest. And Vite Node for a long time lived inside the Vitest repo. And at one point, we're starting to see that other project was adopting it. And this was a very interesting feature. So like Vladimir Sheremet, that's like one of the main leads on Vitest now. He already had like rewriting the whole Vite node as part of his work in Vitest. And he moved that into Vite Core. We released it as runtime API. And this was like the ability of like creating these runners that will like run code compiled by the Vite dev server, like, but in other, like you could like do it inside Miniflare, for example, like to run worker D, simulate it in your local machine or in a thread. And we did that, and the people from Cloudflare got very excited and give us I got a lot of feedback, because this could allow them to create abstractions for like how to frameworks could represent like the edge environments, but at the like share it across all the frameworks. And it was in Vue.js Amsterdam on the previous year that we got in the middle of the conference, we got like the feedback from Igor Minar from the Crawford team, and saying like, this is amazing, but it's not enough. And like we
need more.
All we need. and there was like a lot of other discussion in the middle. Like for example, like Vinci, the idea of like, given that the ecosystem is starting to like converge into needing to orchestrate several environments, Vite could take that responsibility. Even if it is more maintenance, maybe the team is already at a place that we can take it. And so like we scratched the runtime API and created this environment API that was like a huge internal refactoring. And now we released that in Vite 6 at the end of last year. And that just opened up a ton of possibilities, because Vite now has the flexibility to create as many environments as you need. And like each environment, like you can really represent during build and dev how your application works. And we are seeing now how frameworks are starting to adopt it, and like there is like a lot of work. We released it as backward compatible, so like all the framework were still using this like layer that hided the environment in like these two still client and SSR.
That was still work.
It was still working as before, but you can, as a framework, you can opt in and say like, no, like I have, these are my 3 environments. This is how I want to build them. This is how you do dev for each of them. Like, for example, like if you have an edge environment, like Cloudflare can start to say, like give you a environment factory function directly from Cloudflare SDK, where you can say in your Vite app, okay, this environment is going to be a Cloudflare or a worker D environment. So, and they configure everything so that works during dev in a certain way. And the code is executing inside Miniflare, for example.
That sounds so flexible. Like, it's also so amazing that you can actually represent then all the different, let's say, intricacies of, oh yeah, Cloudflare workers with their limitations, but their bindings and benefits and so on. Like having the option that integrations are really more integral and not just like, oh yeah, you have these 2 environments and that's it.
Yeah, totally. It is very interesting to see now TANStack start. They decided that they are going to move back to using Vite and Environment API and Nitro directly, because like Vinci is, that piece in particular is no longer needed for them, because they like Nitro is getting more powerful. Also, it's also going to be reworked to have like Environment API support. And yeah, it's very interesting. It's like a lot of appreciation for what Nikhil did with Vinci, because it is like, this is how it works also, that like there are pieces in the ecosystem that if enough frameworks end up using, it makes sense to have it in core or have like this common piece that and share as a higher level.
100%. And also to like just say, okay, we try it out. If it doesn't work, it's also fine. But of course, then like, okay, Nitro and Vite had to work together in a certain way to say, okay, different routers, let's say, to create. I think that was like how Vinci was naming that. To say, okay, we have these different pipelines. And of course, ideally, like Vite and Nitro together would be enough to facilitate for the cases of 10 stack start, solid start. And it's so nice that we come back to that by saying, okay, look, Vite in a way matured, quote unquote, say, okay, this is a need of a lot of meta frameworks. Now we can make that happen. We make it so flexible that it's not only good for meta frameworks, but also integration with, as we said before, Cloudflare, Workerd, so on and so on. And eventually that piece of code that was needed to like, okay, we prototype that is not necessary anymore. And I remember like I watched a stream of Ryan and Tanner a couple weeks ago where they announced a 10-stack solid router. And then they were also talking about Vinci and how they are moving back. And also Brandon Roberts was there from Analog, and they were all saying of like, yeah, oh, this Vite plugin they share, or he did this server function approach will just like reuse. So it's so nice to also see that collaboration, which is like across frameworks and like really affects the whole ecosystem. And in a way that this also feels like something that Vite and all projects around really stands for. It's not like, oh, I don't know, React versus Angular, Vue, Svelte. Really like, hey, everybody is working together and all the authors have that common ground as well.
Totally. And I don't know if like final users end up seeing all that, but like in maintainers, like they normally talk between each other, and like there is a ton of influence, and like it is very normal in open source. Like if you do it right, like taking ideas from other project and adapting it to yours, and like you give credit to that and say like, hey, like this was inspired by this other project, and like you give credit where it belongs. If you do like that in a right way, it's why open source works so well. Like not only sharing of code, but also sharing of ideas, and like even just the relationships like between all the maintainers. Like there is for a project like Vite to work, there is so many small things that need to happen in like changes in TypeScript, changes in Node, and changes. And it is very good that all these maintainers are able to work together in a piece that lets them do that once, because if not, like we will all have to do like repeat all this work. At least it's the same with Nitro, that now all the details of how to compile like the source code to each of the platforms and like don't have issues with any of the difference between them, and like that we can do that in a unified way that then later several frameworks can share, and they don't have to repeat all this work. And then frameworks can focus on what make them different, and like focus on new features and keep exploring. I think that we are going to see, talking about like Ryan and, for example, like all the things that happen with signals too in frameworks, like there is so much going on, and it really feels that this year we are going to see everything is kind of mature at this point, but there is still like so much to do. So it will be like a very interesting year for sure.
It will be, but I think that also means that there are like less frameworks coming out, but more like the frameworks are maturing and also converging in a way to get like closer together. I think we've seen this with like all the frameworks except Next.js adopting Vite, and that in a way also moving closer together to say, okay, if you have a Vite plugin, it doesn't matter if you use like Vue or Angular or Svelte, you can use the Vite plugin if it's like a general Vite plugin, right? Anywhere, that's fine. And now for the meta frameworks as well to say, okay, we have Nitro, we have Vite, and then, each of them, they have their own, let's say, model of reactivity. Lots of things are based on signals, but then solid signals are slightly different than Angular signals, of course, but the concept is still the same. And then, well, at some point we get to a point where maybe we can share more things and really get to a point where we get closer and closer and closer together. I really wouldn't mind that. But on the other hand, it's also still great to see that people are innovating and there are new things coming out, be it like libraries. I've seen like 10-stack Form, the release of that, for example. So there are a lot of things in the broad web development ecosystem that are framework agnostic that are happening. And that's great for every developer out there.
Yeah. Like or Vue Vapor coming out
that
now,
be
like, and that is also a story of like sharing, because it is like adopting what like Solid has been and Ryan have been like saying like, hey, Like,
That's
this is
good. Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned before, the whole inspiration part as well, like I'm all for that as well. Like, hey, try to fit things that you think are good ideas into your ecosystem and see if it works. Also, one example, like Vue's reactivity transform, it was tried out, it didn't work out well. Svelte rules, for example, work so well. They look very similar to reactivity transform, even though, of course, under the hood, there are a few other things happening. But it's so nice to see that also one thing that might not work out in a certain community will be fine in another one. It's worth like trying it out, exploring these directions.
Totally. Yeah, and like different framework has like different like kind of mindset that make some of the features work. I think it's like it is a very interesting time. At the same time, tooling feels so much better than before. Like TypeScript, like we have Node running like with type striping now.
Yes,
And
finally.
it's just amazing that like maybe at one point like we're also going to have it in even in the browser, so like we can even like simplify things even further there.
I'm really curious also about the proposal of like the type annotations in the browser. There are a lot of opinions on that. The TC49 one, you said like, oh yeah, you just have annotations and that's fine. But I'm really curious how that will evolve. Also, same with like signals in the browser, like in the actual ECMAScript standard. That will be super interesting to see. Frameworks will leverage them under the hood, and we maybe have like a shared view use or similar for signals. Like for, I don't know, we have then like a solid adapter and a view adapter, an Angular adapter, but the functionality you just have to write once. That could be really cool.
It made me think like I hope that we can as a community scale funding in the same way as like all the complexity and all the teams that are creating all this tooling, because it's very interesting. Like now VoidZero, as you say, like I recommend seeing your episode to understand it is impossible to do roll down and OXC and like port Vite to use roll down without like a company like VoidZero. And in Vite, we are very lucky because like we not only have VoidZero, but like StackBlitz hire me, and also Ari Perkio for Vitesse. I don't know, like Anthony Fu with NuxtLab. We have in Vite a lot of support, and there are other projects that have support also, but there is a lot. I was talking with someone from Node, for example, today, that they are doing so much at Node, and a lot of them, to me, like a lot of the people should be working full time, and companies should be like throwing money at all of them so they can focus on improving Node that everyone is using. And there is like a tragedy of the commons there that nobody does it at the end.
Exactly.
And hopefully like there is like some initiatives, maybe even at the government level, like for example in Europe, there could be like open source directly. It feels a little bit bad that we can maybe need to start like doing some bureaucracy to ask from the government money, but like at some point
better than not getting money, right? That's the other thing.
There are interesting initiatives also, for example like the open source pledge,
exactly.
that like Sentry, that is also an amazing company because they are hiring Ryan Carniato. They're hiring like a lot of open source developers.
TK Dodo as well from Sensor Query.
Like Nate Moore is working for them too now. They started this open source pledge initiative. The idea is that for a company, you have to put every year $2,000 per year per developer. If all the companies will do this, like there will be a lot of funding to properly maintain things. And right now already, I think like 31 companies have been working on this, join the pledge. Like at the StackBlitz, we joined it last year, like at one of the first 20. And I think like it's a very good way to formalize a little bit. Like you can put more if you want, but at least you can do this. I think they like these companies together, they have put already like $2.5 million in open source. So it starts to add up to a good number when you count.
And I really hope there are more following, right? As you said, like this is a good start. And I mean, if you take a look at the list, Sentry, of course, StackBlitz, VoidZero also in there, Sanity, Hero Dev. So like we have a lot of like companies with a big name in open source, also like Laravel, for example, in there, really, really cool, Convex, and so on, so on. So it's really great to see that. I think also if we see more, let's say, agencies or maybe also like companies of a bigger scale there that will also like drive it so much by just saying, okay, at least these companies, they then also can show themselves, hey, we are interested in giving back to open source and we value the contributions there. But yeah, I really hope that will be the case. I remember, for example, as you said, Node, I was talking with Matteo Collina actually last week during DevWorld, where he gave a talk. And also he was saying, yeah, the Node.js budget is like 300K a year. And this year it's only 150K. And we only got require ESM because Bloomberg was sponsoring that in the end. So in a way, he said, like, yeah, if you need features, well, either do them yourself or find a company that can basically find the funds for that, which is, it's in a way sad because you have all these like clever people there and all these like amazing opportunities, but yeah, the funding is simply not there.
Yeah. But I think that hopefully this will keep evolving, and like more projects, like initiatives like the open source pledge, more companies like hiring open source developers, like that. If you are like someone in the position to do it, I completely recommend, because there is always so many opportunities later on to work. Like, and it can be 50-50. Like,
Yeah.
it can be like 20% on open source and like 80% on the project. Like, for example, for Ari Perkio, like he's working now 50% for Vitesse and 50% on Bolt, that we didn't mention, but like, yeah, StackGrid also had this crazy thing happening last year where like Bolt was created this agentic, like using Claude to generate, like, if you want to generate a Vite application right now, I think like you can go to Bolt.new and ask for it.
Yeah, or like any framework actually, right?
Yeah,
yeah. Like, hey, build a slideshow with SlideF. It's really amazing. That
I'm thinking that for the Vite docs at one point, maybe it will be interesting, like instead of having these static starters, like for each framework, that directly in the docs at one point you could say like had the prompt, and like start from like a blog about something, and then you can start from a lot higher place. But like, so Ari Perkio is working like half of his time on Vault, and like he's doing things with like Vitesse there, for example, and like it's just amazing because open source developer has like a very interesting perspective that can give in the way that you can give feedback about product, or like that it's very interesting. And even if you work like me, like 100% on the Vite side, there is always opportunities, because one of the things that we did with the StackGrid, for example, was organizing ViteConf. This was like a huge opportunity for like collaborating at the level of like doing something interesting for the Vite ecosystem, and at the same time like something helpful for like a StackGrid, because like getting closer to this growing ecosystem was always like very, very interesting. Like this ViteConf was where they announced Bolt last year, for example. So
true that, yeah. And I mean, also like showing, once again, as a company, showing that you're deeply invested into open source will also help attracting talents all over the world as well, and just gives you a really good reputation and position. I mean, who dislikes a company that says like, hey, we're all in open source. We, I don't know, give you 20% time or even more, as you said, 50-50, or even hire people full-time to work on open source. Yeah, that's something more companies should do for sure.
Yeah. Hopefully they do, because we have a lot to maintain. All the things that we have been talking about, like there is so many things that daily are happening, like so many issues that are open, so many interrelationship, like this ecosystem CI. Today, Dominic G, for example, like just said, like he was like going through each of the projects that we had, and for a long time after Environment API, I think that was one of the first time that we released it, Vite 6, without everyone in green. And this was like already pre-discussed with like some of the framework. And this was, they were failing just some edge cases. So it was like still like, it was not going to affect like most users. But this particular, like I think in the last 2 weeks, he has been going one by one and making sure. And like today was all green for the first time in a lot of months. And that is like a lot of work that like it goes unnoticed. But having Vite ecosystem CI all green now on Vite main is amazing, because the work that Safi Red is doing, for example, on Rolldown Vite, he can know that like then on main is green, like and it's like it's very good information to inform how Rolldown Vite is working. And that, because if there is a red on main, like it's already not working.
Exactly.
So there is so much. Like there is so many people involved. Like it is impossible to mention. Also, like a shout out. Like if you're listening to this, you know who you are, and thanks for everything you do.
Yeah, I can only agree. I mean, we see it also in the Nuxt team with like all the contributors, and then just think of that with all the frameworks. Like as I said before, it is a lot of work, but thankfully also, for example, Dominic G, in this case, also shout out. It's also possible thanks to a lot of like spare time in the end. And people
totally.
just investing their time, not seeing any kind of money from it. Also, like what you did in, let's say, your free time in the end.
That is most of it, to be honest. Like a lot of open source is like done because you love to do it, because you just love to build things together with people.
Yeah, people don't go to open source for the money, obviously. Yes.
It's not the best way to get money, but it should change, as we have been discussing, because it like so much depend on it. A lot of companies now like are going to like they already are, but like there's going to be huge security issues if you don't have properly funded maintainers for your project. Like you need to take care. Like if you are a huge company, like you need to think that these people are part of your product, you know, like these are external, but they are still like huge influence in like the quality of your own product. So hopefully like this will be something that with time it will be like a lot more commonplace.
Same, can only agree. We had Daniel Rowe actually a couple episodes ago here in January for the predictions for 2025, and he was like, this year, hopefully we'll solve sustainability in open source. So I'm crossing my fingers very, very much to come on, we can do it somehow. But there are so many ways in the end where like sometimes like tiny contributions matter. For example, like you can sponsor people on GitHub and so on. There are also, of course, funds like the open prototype funds for technology. There's also there are a couple of ways where you have to either apply, and as we said before, there are also here and there are some governmental programs to apply for. But I also recently saw that Stackblitz created its own OSS fund.
Yeah. This is like part of our like the open source pledge. Like we were already like for the past 2 years, we have been funding not only like me and like Ari Parker that joined it last year, but like also like sponsoring the Vite team.
Mm-hmm.
And sponsoring other open source, like some open source developer working on WASM. That is very important for web containers. That is what the technology that allows you to run nodes in the browser. Like, so we have been doing this. One of the main external sponsor that we did during the past 2 years was with Johnson, because he wanted to do Volar to be also framework independent. At the beginning, Volar was like Vue only, and he wanted to be able to have like a toolkit to build IDE tooling that any framework can use. And so like we took it with them, with him, and we end up like sponsoring for 2 years the initial development of this like Volar as framework agnostic. And he did an amazing job, like together with other people from the team. Now it's like used by MDX, by Astro, and is powering a lot of IDE tooling. Hopefully like even more in the future. Now this year, what we did with the fund, we want to diversify a lot more. So we created like the success of Vault also let us go a little bit higher. So we created like a 100K for the year open source fund, and we announced it a couple of weeks ago. And we are keep vetting on this share infrastructure, because this is something that like we really believe on. So like for example, we started sponsoring Puya for the work on Nitro and Nux.js. We keep a sponsor Anthony Fu, Vladimir, because also like for Vitesse. And then also like the Unify, a lot of pieces also are the dependencies of Bolt too. Like we discussed it like directly with the whole team, and there were a lot of proposals. A lot of the dependencies we are able now to also sponsor. This also will count as our open source pledge.
I see. Yes.
Renewal for this particular year. Like we are way above the required 2,000. I think that at this point we are around 5,000, but with StackBlitz is hiring, so like that may per developer may shrink depending on how much like StackBlitz will grow. But I love that part of like working there and ended up being also like helping like other open source developers, like this is something that like with Eric, again, like the CEO, we have like from the beginning, like there was this idea of like how we do more. And like BitConf was one part of like this giving back to the community. And then like what we did with Johnson, and this is like continuing that. And I hope that we could do more like in the future.
Fingers crossed for that. But I mean, also that's, as you said before, tied a bit also to the success of Bolt or general stack plots. So it's also great that Bolt exploded, especially in times of AI, having a tool where it's not like, oh yeah, React only, or can especially do well with React. Like, hey, any framework out there, if you want to build a Svelte kit application, you just you just go for it.
And that will be extremely important. These are discussions that we have internally, that there is this worried about AI being trained on a lot of React code and only generating by default React code. And we have like established this in a position always of being very friendly with the whole ecosystem, like with, I don't know, like the tutorial from SvelteKit was like using web containers to run SvelteKit in the browser. And then after that, we got inspired from them, the tutorial kit dev, to be able to like anyone can create one tutorial using the same technology. And there was like always this idea of like, yeah, let's try to make it very easy to make a starters for everybody, not only like the main player, you know, like everybody. And I think that like it's important, like in this era, as you said, like that a lot of the maybe smaller frameworks will have like less training data for them, you know, and then it is an imbalance that we need to see how to manage, because long term we need to keep evolving. Like it's also not only about like React against other, it is about even React will keep evolving. So like if you only train and like your model is fixated on a particular ear of that framework, is going to be generating things that are like wrong as it evolved. So I think there will be a lot of very interesting stuff to do long term, and even to do things like maybe a user of Bolt, like it is a Svelte user, and like he shouldn't be needing to say like generate a Svelte app that every time. And so like we could maybe at one point have like branded versions of Vault where you go and you are like, it is a red version, you know, and it's like this is like Svelte for you, or like you have a green version for like Vue, and then whatever you ask is going to generate Vue apps because it is your preference. And this is how you can already do this, because you can modify the prompt, the system prompt, like you can change it. And so you could say there like always do Vue. But I think there are possibilities to even be like go farther there.
But I guess it's all also like a lot of exploration, a lot of trying out things in the future. On that note, it was really interesting. I was talking with Steve from Builder.io about that. That's like will also be released. This was a Q&A of a talk he gave also at DevWorld, where I was like, do you think React will be the only framework left because AI is trained so well on it? And he actually said something quite interesting. He said no. I was like, okay, great. Yay. But especially he said that Mishko, who was former Angular team lead and like was a lot into Quick, of course, as well, created it. He made an experiment to say, okay, he was just like feeding an LLM like for like a fully new framework, just some trained data in, and it could perform pretty well. So in a way, it's not necessarily only the amount of data, because of course, if you also think about that, a lot of code out there, not saying necessarily React code, just in general code, is also not really high quality. So I think it's also a lot down of like how well are the ecosystems doing, right? How many examples are there? And that in a way benefits the user that's saying, okay, I want an example for, I don't know, even if you just take something like Nitro, how can I read in form data in Nitro or like binary data and deal with that? If there are examples for that. Perfect.
Yeah. And you can generate like this data, like in programming, like you can generate it in a synthetic way, maybe like for new features. Like
even
you will need to do these kind of things in the future. And hopefully, models get like faster to train and like are trained in a maybe monthly, weekly basis, or like, you know, like
more
it's not like it's not like, because we also need that, like for example, for these features, like adding it to the docs, and like if you're going to be starting from the docs, you need like the model to generate with the most recent version. So like, but it's just incredible how fast everything is like changing in this regard. Like some models are getting a lot better very fast. So I think we will get to a point where this will not be a problem. Like with all the love to React is not good for anyone that React is the end of history.
Agreed.
It is good that we have a lot of different frameworks exploring different alternatives, because we also, like, as Evan always say, that like they are very different people that likes different things, and sometimes it is also about what clicks for you.
We 100%. Which concepts work?
It's not about like which framework is better than the other, because like a lot of we live in like Wonderland. Like all the frameworks are so amazing right now.
Yeah, you can build amazing things with all of them. That's the best part. It's a lot about understanding, and sometimes just like, okay, you don't really have to try out a new framework, but because if you know one already, but you just do it for, let's see how they do things. Maybe this works better for me. Like, hey, maybe this is an interesting concept. So it never hurts to look into that. But regarding React and Vite, making a little circle back there, there was also something happening recently. So Create React app, for everybody who's like hasn't heard of that, Create React app was the more or less the way to go to create a new React app, as the package name sounds. It was, well, de facto deprecated. Nobody said it officially, but it was not really recommended by anyone except, I think, still in the docs. And then at some point, it was like, yeah, we should maybe deprecate it. A lot of people in React ecosystem pushed for it, and it happened. It got deprecated. And a lot of people, once again, in the React universe said like, yeah, there's only like one logical recommendation to say, instead of Create React app, you should use something else. And that would just be like Vite. I mean, we have like in Vite, you have all the things with, you can choose your framework. You can say, okay, React with TypeScript, JavaScript, whatsoever. Same with Vue. You can start whatever you want there. So that would be kind of natural, but somehow it didn't happen like that, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting story, because there are like two things going on there. Like one is like Create React app that was not like maintained for a long time. Like 2 years ago, it should have been deprecated, because it was hurting a lot of new users. Like there was a ton of like backlinks to it in tutorials, in videos, and like everybody that did like explaining how to start like 2 years ago, that there is a lot of information on the internet, like we're pointing to it. So if people will end up like installing something that was using outdated code, like it was not even working, I think, for React 19. Like it was only working for React 18. It was a very bad experience. So that was extremely welcome that at the end they deprecated, and now like users will receive like a proper message warning them, and then they can go to explore like modern alternatives that are well maintained. And the thing about Vite is like a longer story also, with like the React team at one point decided that they wanted to push very heavily to new users into using a full framework like Next.js or Gatsby. It was, I think, in the documentation.
Oh yeah, Gatsby back in times. Yeah.
The idea there was that if you are not like using a framework, then you are creating your own. That there is certain truth into that, but at the same time, like because of how React is evolving, like with React server components, and they need this like server to like work to be able to do React server components, and like React as a library is evolving to a place where if you want to use fully the vision of the React team, you need a framework that does a lot of things. Also, like Next.js is like the example of a framework that some of the React team members are also collaborating there. So this is like what they recommended. And Vite, they didn't want it to recommend, because like our bare templates that you create with Create Vite is like very minimal. Like we use it for our back reproductions, because it is like there has nothing in the sense of like testing setup or like Tailwind. The idea is that you have like the minimal setup for your framework, and you can do something else like on top later on. It's a little bit different that with Create React app, because like with Vite, adding new functionality is like just like installing a plugin in your Vite config. Is not that hard. Like adding a new framework, adding Tailwind, like normally it's just like one line of code that you copy and paste. It's not hard to do. But at the same time, like for example, in Vue, you have create Vue. And create Vue is like a starter where you can also have like, do you want testing or not? Like, do you want like set up a storybook? Do you want to have Tailwind or not? Like, and this, it's a more complete option. So like for Vue users, we were saying like, yeah, go to create Vue, for example. But there was never that for React. There were a lot of templates maintained by the community, but none of them were the go-to to send them. So the option they had is to recommend like this simple Vite setup.
At the bare minimum,
and the bare minimum that is also SPA, like a single page app. And this is also something that the React team, like with the idea of like you need like a full framework, you need a server, like didn't want it to promote. So for a long time, Vite was mentioned as a side in the docs.
Yeah,
like
it was exactly. It was like hidden in the collapse.
Yeah,
it was
hidden in collapse. So it was a little bit like sad in a sense, because they're like, one thing is like what the React team wants to promote. That is completely understandable. Like we also do the same in Vite. Like we document the things that we want to promote.
Yeah.
But also the way that React was being used by a big chunk of the community, the React community, it was different. It was like there is a lot of just using like Vite plugin React and like assembling the pieces. And because Vite is not that hard to like assemble the pieces yourself, it doesn't feel that you're creating your own framework.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of single page application that are like, it makes a ton of sense. For example, if you build enterprise dashboard that is not public, I mean, like something internal that the user will have for 2 hours open, like it makes complete sense to have like a single place application that you
definitely
just use.
You don't need anything server like there. Yeah.
No. One thing that happened is that when they deprecated, they converted that aside into a node. So it was not collapsed. So that was like a big
little upgrade.
Yes. But there was like a lot of pushback after that from the community, and they keep talking. Mark Eriksson, the maintainer of Redux, he was one of the people that were pushing initially again, reopening the topic.
He even rewrote. I think he sent it like a PR and like rewrote a part of that. I remember. Yeah.
2 years ago, I think like Theo was the one like doing a lot of noise about this, and now I think like Mark was the one that reignited everything. After like they did these changes, like he also proposed a lot of things in the docs that they didn't end up there. They added some docs about how to, for example, how to build a framework. This was the new page that they added. Like, and it was like, the way it was worded, it was clear that they didn't want you to do it.
Yeah.
Like, it was like
you could do it, but you can rather use one of these other solutions.
Yeah. It was like, if you really want to go that way, like we cannot stop you. It's this kind of way.
Yeah.
So he created a new PR where he showed directly what will be like an interesting way to, for example, like instead of having this page about how to create a new framework, it was like how to start from scratch. That it was like more like positive way. Like, and in that like arrangement, he also will mention Vite more like prominent in the getting a starting guide. And Ricky from the React team he was already involved, I think, in the previous changes. He got that PR and created a new PR based it on that, but like also with some other things. And now Vite is like mentioned directly together with Parcel and AirSpac as options. And then this create a framework was renamed as Start from Scratch. So I think that it ended up in a very good way. I think the community is a lot happier now in how it is represented.
Agreed. And I'm happy also that there were people, I remember like, I know, Ken Wheeler and Dax and a lot of people just like writing like Vite on social networks, just like reposting that with the same.
On the other hand, I have to say that like it is always hard to be on the open source side, maintainer side. Like for the React team to get all these, they also want to go in a certain direction. And like we also like in the Vue community also experience a lot of like mob-like behavior, let's say, from like the Vue 2 or like composition API when that appear, or like even when Svel mentioned runes, like it is always hard. But I think there is a lot of value that in this particular case, they end up like listening to the community, because it was something that I really think that it will help React, like it will help a lot of people that are starting to learn React.
I agree. Yes.
To start with this more like simple, not like full framework thing. At least like when I started learning, I think that it was good to just like have a single page application and put some React component and see it work, and not have to think about like a full framework like Next.js, just like to start with, you know?
100%. I also feel the same. Like usually when I teach Vue, for example, it's like, I don't start with Nuxt straight away. It's like very simple, very bare bone. Play.vue.js.org. And there you go. It's like the easiest start with like not even a build step, so to say, right? It's all in browser. You have the compiler straight away showing you what's there. And then starting with like, okay, the basics are there. Let's create our own application with Vite and so on and so on. Because especially at the beginning, if you know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, like there are a lot of things that can overwhelm you a lot, especially if we had it with Nuxt too, like this wizard with questions like, hey, do you want this module? Do you want TypeScript testing and so on and so on? And if you really have no idea, like, what is all of this? I guess I need all of them. So yes. And then you end up with a lot of files that you don't know what they're doing. So like having that step-by-step experience is really beneficial, I would say. Yeah.
And now there's like other options. Like there is this create Tanestack router, or like a Tan router app, or like I don't know what is the name, like, but it's like a simpler setup, but using like Tanestack router. And also like you have like React router that like if you do like create React router.
Yes. Previously Remix, right?
Previously Remix, that now like it is like also a simple setup, like using Vite and React router. And that are more like complete replacement for current React app. It will be interesting to see like what is going to end up like taking the place of current React app, because it was very clear at one point, like everybody was just going there.
Yeah.
And every tutorial will just say like, yes, create React app is how you start. And now the recommendation is like, at least from the React docs, is more open. But I think like there will be some conversions even like outside of the React docs.
Oh yeah, like just like how tutorials. Yes, I agree. I'm also really like curious, as you mentioned, the Create TS Router app. I also had to look up the name from Jack Harrington. It's super interesting to say, okay, so 10-stack based, of course, TS Router app, 10-stack router. They're straight away putting things in like, of course, add-ons like, hey, please add, I don't know, 10-stack queries, Sentry, and so on, but add solid support. So you have like one tick to say React or solid, especially for new applications. This is super interesting. And I think especially where Tana and Ryan moving, like I see a lot of people in the React universe very positively about the whole like 10-stack, so to say, from, of course, query, like forms out now, but the router, obviously. Yeah, I'm curious where also like decline in positivity in Next.js and React might shake up the ecosystem there.
Also, like I feel that is the same thing that Ryan said, that it's very interesting. I want to see React and Next explore the way they are going, because they are now the only one that are exploring full throttle that particular line.
Yes.
So it's very interesting, like where they are going. But yeah, it is like in particular with Next.js is a little bit harder to share between like all the others. So it will be very interesting to see how the ecosystem continue to evolve. My take always is that like sharing have a ton of positive outcomes, like
Definitely.
in the ecosystem. Like what you say about like there are not new frameworks, it is true at the level of like Solid, Vue, React as well, like these big like
component level frameworks, so to say.
Yes,
yeah.
But meta frameworks, now that it is easier to build one because there are all these shared pieces. So like from analog for like the Brandner is working on,
yes,
or like in React now you have like Redwood is working on a reboot, you have like
Waku, exactly, yes.
Then like now Tanestack start, like the Remix Fox with React Router, And that is like 4 big ones.
Yeah. And not even mentioning Next.js there. So yes, in addition to Next.
And there is a lot more, like Vike also, and like Rakas was at one point, like, I don't know, like it's hard to get like a lot of traction, but like the dimension was there are big players.
Yeah, so I think that's indeed something that we'll see more and more with all these tools, underlying libraries, tools available to just people building meta frameworks with their vision or contributing to some. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. On that note, I think, well, we're in for 1.5 hours, more than that. We also drifted away from the Vue focus a little bit, which is more than fine, because I think it's still good to know what's going on in the general web ecosystem, even though a lot of people here probably won't write React, more than good. Still, Patak, now one last question. Where can people find you, follow you, and get more of what you do?
Like now, like I'm most active on Blue Sky. So like if you go there, like you can put patak.dev and you're going to find me. Or like if my webpage is also patak.dev. So easy. There you can have like all the links. But if not, like Discord, GitHub, or came chat.
Everywhere there, yeah. Please give him a follow. The links in the show notes or in the description on YouTube, of course. But like, thank you so much for joining. I think that was a lovely episode all around Vite. What it is, I hope everybody out there has a clear understanding now what's going on there. And if you have any questions, please, as we said before, drop them in. We'll go through them, happily answer them. And well, is there anything else and new things to share around Vite that might come up soon?
Well, we have the next week. But this I think that this episode, now is Vue.js Amsterdam. So I hope like if you are around, I think you're going to hear a lot of very interesting Vite stuff in the conference.
Otherwise, we'll also probably link to some things in the show notes. If I manage to do it while being at the conference, let's see. But maybe the live stream or so. Definitely, keep an eye on. There will be some interesting teasers at Vue Amsterdam, some amazing things coming up. But thank you so much for joining. Any last words?
Thanks a lot again. It was really lovely to be talking to you. And let's do it again like in a year. And for sure, there will be a lot of interesting developments to keep talking.
100%. Thank you so much. Out there, check out if that's not the latest episode, check out the latest episode of DejaVue, otherwise the older ones. Also the link from VoidZero that we mentioned before, or any that you like. Until next time, see you folks.
See y'all.